Welcome everyone to this latest Daily Declaration podcast. We're thrilled to have on as a very special guest Mike Southon, and he is from Freedom for Faith. So, Mike, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
It is a pleasure, and what we want to talk about today is, probably 6 weeks ago, I can't remember exactly, but there was a digital online forum that the Canberra Declaration held, and it was to promote what we're calling the Meet the Candidates forums, running in hopefully as many electorates, federal electorates around the country as possible. We
Mm.
wanted to promote that. Could you just tell us what has happened since we've held that online summit? Has it helped increase the number of Meet the Candidate forums? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, just in brief, the Meet the Candidate forums are an idea where the church, a local church, or a group of churches decide to get together, fill the building with Christians, invite the local candidates for that electorate, and ask them some questions. That's the idea. Before the event that we ran, we had about 50 electorates where a church had put their hand up to hold a candidate forum, which it was a really exciting number. That was about a third of the country. There are 150 electorates in Australia. After the event, in the week and a bit after the event, we actually went from 50 to 70. So a lot of that growth is definitely connected with that forum, with churches and individuals hearing about the idea and saying, "Oh no, I'll go talk to my church. We'll see if we can do this." So that's been very encouraging growth. At our peak, we've had almost 75 electorates. So almost half the country had a church put their hand up and say, "We want to run one of those things," which is unprecedented. It's never been happened in Australia before. That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very much pioneering new ground
Yeah.
in that sense. So it is. It's really exciting to see, as you said, just this thing gather some momentum and increase. I want to ask you. You said that this election is critical for Christians. Why
Yeah.
do you think that?
There used to be a time in Australia that we had this agreement that different groups of people who believe different things can kind of just go and do their thing. If you believe in this sort of thing about sexuality and marriage, you can go and live your way. If we believe in churches, Christians believe different things, we can actually live our way. But increasingly, particularly extension of anti-discrimination legislation has really imposed on Christians and on churches and started saying, well, no, you actually can't do your thing. You can't believe what you believe. You can't say what you say. So that's been slowly growing at this, particularly at various state level legislation, and at the federal level, we've seen attempts to really push hard against churches, Christians. Uh, those attempts haven't been particularly successful, but they're going to get stronger and stronger over the next few years. The next government, the next 3 years, are really going to be critical for laying down what is an acceptable balance. What can Christians say, or what can't we say? And our next government is going to be debating all these things. I mean, that's not even counting the religious discrimination bill, which was attempted and failed by the Morrison government, attempted and failed by the Albanese government. We have to nail down legislation that protects all people of faith, particularly Christians in this court, and our ability to be Christians, our ability to live out our faith. So there's going to be a lot discussed. You may recall the disinformation bill from last year, and it had massive threats to our ability to talk about our faith online. This sort of legislation is going to come before Parliament, whoever is in government, and we need both sides of government to be committing to protecting religious freedom before the election so that we can hold them to it after the election. Yeah, it's going to be big.
Yeah, thanks for that summary. That's very helpful. So the issue of religious freedom, or the ability to practice Christian faith and other faith as well, is that the biggest issue that you would see that we should be asking our candidates at these forums? And is there any other questions that you think, look, if Christians should really be concerned and ask these particular questions? Could you give us some examples of that?
Well, I think Christians have got a pretty big investment just in the cost of living issue,
Hmm.
not just for ourselves, and really not for ourselves, but how's cost of living affecting the most vulnerable people, the people who Jesus is calling us to love and care for? And both sides of politics have got a very different view on how to solve the problem. And we need to critically engage with those views and say, well, which one is going to be helping the country, but which one particularly is going to be helping those who are most vulnerable? So Freedom for Faith, we worked with heads of churches to come ask them what were the key questions that they wanted asked at these forums. So we're not just asking about religious freedom. And so this is coming from senior leaders in a wide range of churches that we work together with. And they identified 2 questions on religious freedom, about our individual rights to speak and our organizational rights to run an organization according to our faith. But then they identified cost of living, particularly how it affects the most vulnerable. They identified the harms of gambling and particularly at the federal level, sports gambling and gambling advertising, noting that poker machines are a state issue. And there's also a really interesting concern about persecuted religious minorities overseas, that there is no pathway for a persecuted religious minority to be brought into Australia. So there is a pathway for, if you're a persecuted racial minority in a country, that's recognised by Australia. We can bring them in as refugees. But if you're actually part of the dominant race, but you converted from, say, Islam to Christianity, the government doesn't have a framework for that, which is a really concerning oversight. And there's a lot of persecuted Christians around the world. So that's another question that was identified that we want to ask both sides. How are you going to be looking after the most vulnerable brothers and sisters around the world? So those were the 5 questions that the heads of churches suggested. But there are so many questions that we can be asking. There are questions about whether Christian hospitals are going to be forced to perform abortions in order to get federal funding. That's a proposal that we've seen, from instance, from the Greens. There's all sorts of ways that the government can really impose on our religious freedom. And there are just the 10,000 ways that the government can affect our life and our country. And Christians should be concerned about all of them. We care about our brothers and sisters. We care about our society. So it's not just us. It's not just our rights. I'm concerned about my right to be a Christian. We've got to be concerned about everybody in Australia. And so it's a long answer, but it's a big question. I think we're concerned about everything, but specifically as Christians, we've got a unique question around religious freedom.
Yeah, that's a fascinating answer that you put there, and those questions that have been put together by the heads of the church leaders, plus all the other questions that we could potentially ask.
Yeah.
That would make for an extremely interesting Meet the Candidates forum. I would love to hear from candidates what their proposed solutions or engagement with these really critical issues would be. That would be a fascinating discussion.
Yeah.
Could I just ask then, you've talked about, religious freedom, but all the other things that can impact our lives, and I guess the importance, not just for us as Christians, but for everybody. Australia was set up to have religious freedom and to allow, I guess, the Christian faith to do its thing. And that has done an incredible amount of good in our society. And that's why I want to see that continue. Could you just explain why, if certain legislation were to pass that would be anti-Christian in its intent and effect, how that would actually be a violation of the principle of church and state that this nation was founded on?
Yeah, and first of all, it's important to clarify what we mean by the separation of church and state, because most people now interpret the separation of church and state to say religious people can't get involved in politics.
Yes, exactly.
But the foundational concept from the US, but improved, I should argue, in the Australian Constitution, was that the government is not supposed to interfere in how you go about living your faith. And so there shouldn't be an established church. It shouldn't be a government dictate.
A state church.
You have to believe this. You can't believe that. Now, the main area that this sort of freedom, or 2 areas that this our ability to live our faith and express our faith is most impacted by government legislation, is in controlling speech, and so particularly around hate speech, vilification legislation, misinformation, disinformation. These packages of legislation, which on their surface, are trying to prevent harm to people, harm caused by bad speech.
Mm.
And the question then becomes, how do you define what is bad speech, what is harmful speech, and how do you create good exemptions around religious freedom? So that's, for instance, take the misinformation disinformation bill. The way that it was structured is it said that big internet companies like Facebook had to take down stuff which was deemed to be misinformation. And the definition of misinformation was included content that could be harmful to people based on certain protected attributes, which included religion, which included sexuality. So, but it didn't give any good definition of what's harmful. So is a Muslim saying to me that Allah is the only way and I'm going to hell, is that harmful to me? Well, I could claim that's harmful to me and force Facebook to take it down. All of a sudden, that chills all forms of religious speech online. Same thing with debates about gender and sexuality, or all sorts of issues that faith has got a view on. Somebody could say, "Oh, your disagreement with me, saying that God doesn't agree with me, or whatever we want to say, that's harmful to me. And so therefore that needs to be silenced." So that's one of the big impacts that federal legislation could have. But it comes in many shapes. As I said, vilification legislation or hate speech legislation, misinformation, disinformation, these sorts of things. The other area that could be most easily influenced is for our organizations' ability to operate according to our faith. And the sharpest point of this wedge at the moment is faith-based schools. And so there is debate about whether faith-based schools are allowed to choose to employ somebody who lives out their faith. And that's what faith-based schools, or many faith-based schools, have been doing for a very long time, is saying we only employ Christian teachers and groundskeepers and office staff and everything else. We want a Christian community. We only employ Christians. And if somebody's life outside of the school demonstrates that they do not believe the Christian faith as we as a school understand it to be, then they don't have a place here anymore. Now, that is, by every sense of the definition, discrimination. But we have discrimination in employment all the time. You can't force a Liberal Party MP to employ a Labor Party member as their staffer. They're allowed to say, no, I only employ Liberal Party staff members. That's discrimination. But we agree that's absolutely fine. That makes perfect sense. Can faith-based institutions do the same thing? Say, well, we only want to employ people who actually live out our faith. The problem comes when our decision about that expression of faith comes down to sexuality and gender. People are living a life that does not represent a Christian view of how sex and sexuality is supposed to be lived out. And I don't just mean people who are gay. I mean people who are living in a relationship outside of marriage, all sorts of possibilities where the school needs to be able to say, no, you're showing that you don't believe our faith. You're not repentant. It's not as if it was a mistake and you're trying to... So we've worked with you, we've talked with you, and we don't think there's a place here at the school anymore. At the moment, that's legal, but there's a lot of moves to remove the sorts of protections that allow schools to do that. And that really is, I know it's dangerous to talk about the thin edge of the wedge, but that really is the thin edge of the wedge, because we saw in Queensland, the state brought legislation that not only stripped those protections from schools, they stripped them from churches as well. And very kindly, they allowed churches to discriminate when employing ordained staff. But then your office staff, your unordained youth ministers, all sorts of categories of people that churches employ, they could no longer require those people to live out their faith in their day-to-day life, particularly around matters of sexuality and gender. So it really is the thin edge of the wedge when it comes to schools. So even if you're not a big believer in private schooling, you're not a big believer in faith-based schooling, we're actually protecting all our Christian institutions by keeping the argument at schools and allowing faith-based schools to be able to operate according to their faith. So that's really the other big battlefront that has been a major issue in the past 3 years in the past government. And to their credit, the Albanese government have not taken away any of those, despite quite significant pressure. And it will be the debate in the next 3 years. It's going to be a major issue.
Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying that and putting it in such clear language. To, I guess, finish up this interview, then, if someone's listening to this and they have only heard a little bit, but they're getting excited about this and going, hey, I would love to see a Meet the Candidates forum run in my federal electorate because I want to make an impact and I want to see, good legislation continue and to improve in Australia as well for the betterment of all people. What can people do? Like, it's getting very close to the election now, but if someone wanted to jump on the phone or write an email to Mike Southon and say, hey, I want to be involved in this, what can people do?
Well, look, if your church is interested in holding one of these, any time really before the election is called, or maybe the first week after the election is called, we could get a church rolling on one of these. Send me an email, mike@freedomforfaith.org.au, and or just to our main one, info@freedomforfaith.org.au, and let me know. And we can talk through what's involved. It's fairly easy. If you can run a church service, you can run one of these forums. We've got detailed how-to guides about all the stages of running the forum. We will help you inviting the candidates and chasing them up. So we can help you with all the stuff that you don't actually know how to do. I can help you with how to moderate the questions so that they don't become a bit of a shouting match. And we use an online system for moderation. All that to make it really easy. So if you can open a building, preferably you have live streaming, and you have people coming in, if you can just be up the front and emceeing an event, anyone who can run church service can run one of these. But secondly, go find the forum that's closest to you. As I said, we've got 70 churches who've put their hands up. At the moment, we're still chasing down candidates and trying to get them to turn up. But find your forum and attend. Tell your church about it. Tell the churches around. If there are 100 people at the forum, that's all right. If there are 200 people at the forum, that's a real success. If we got 400 people at the forum, that's a statement. No other group of people can get 400 people at a local electorate forum. And so for the church to be able to say, we really can mobilize our people, we can get our people out and coming to one of these things, that makes politicians of both sides realize, oh, okay, you're serious and we have to take your issues seriously. So that's the most important thing, is come, be part. If you can't be part of, if there's not one in your electorate, I'm pretty sure there's one in the electorate next door to you. So go to that one. And if you can't do any of them, go watch them online. Many of them are live streamed. And we're going to be telling politicians what their YouTube stats were on the events as well. So get involved. But yeah, if you want to run one, give me a shout, info@freedomforfaith.org.au.
Yeah. And I suppose someone doesn't have to do all of it. It's not like you have to, if you put your hand up to facilitate one of these, you have to do this and this and this. You can pull other people in on your team. You could ask someone to MC, for example. You could get your local pastor to MC it or to help run it.
Yes,
other churches involved as well. In fact, the more people involved, I would say the better. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And when you can demonstrate, especially multiple churches in an electorate saying we're working together, that again makes a politician realize, oh, there's something different here. This isn't just St. Bob's down the road who's calling me in. This is 5 churches in my electorate saying that they want to talk to me. And that means I'll have people from 5 churches, and all of a sudden politicians are realizing this is something that they really need to engage with. I didn't mention the website where you can find all the forums. Meetyourcandidates.org.au. Meetyourcandidates.org.au lists all the forums, has a search engine so you can find the one that's closest to you. Get online now and have a look and see where your forum is.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on the Daily Declaration podcast. And for everyone that's listening, thank you so much for tuning in. And we really hope that you get behind these Meet the Candidate forums. They are very important for this election. And also, please pray for this and let other people know about them and try and get as many Christians, churches, Christian schools, anyone who is able to to be involved in these, and let's make a real impact in this federal election. So Mike, once again, thank you so much for coming on. We absolutely endorse what you're doing. We thank you for what you are doing, and we wish you every blessing on your work, and it'll be multiplied, and great fruit comes from it in this upcoming federal election. So thank you so much, Mike, for coming on.
Thanks so much. It's been great.